No advanced technology could save her, until a barefoot black girl led by bikers changed everything. The most advanced medical center in the entire southeastern United States had every piece of cutting-edge equipment imaginable, robotic surgery systems that cost more than most homes, diagnostic computers that could analyze thousands of data points in seconds, teams of specialists who had trained at the finest institutions in the world. And yet, on that humid August afternoon in rural Georgia, all of it meant absolutely nothing, because the one person who held the key to saving a dying woman was a 10-year-old girl named Iris, walking barefoot down a dusty back road. Her feet bleeding from the gravel, running toward the distant rumble of motorcycle engines she had heard echoing through the pine trees. Iris had no phone, no shoes, no way to call for help. The nearest neighbor was 7 miles away, and the man who should have been caring for her grandmother had instead driven off 3 days ago with the car. The money and every ounce of dignity they had left. Now her grandmother lay unconscious in that small wooden house, her breathing shallow, her skin the color of ash, and the electricity had been cut off 2 weeks before. There was no way to call an ambulance. There was no way to reach anyone. But Iris had heard something that morning, a sound that cut through the cicada song and the oppressive Georgia heat. Motorcycles, a lot of them. And in her desperate young mind, motorcycles meant people, people who might help, people who might listen, people who might care about an old woman dying in a house forgotten by the world. The Iron Covenant Motorcycle Club had been riding together for over 30 years. They were not the kind of men most people approached willingly. Their leather vests bore patches earned through decades of loyalty, service, and sacrifice. Many of them were veterans. Some had served in Vietnam, others in Desert Storm. A few had done tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. They had seen things that most people only read about in history books, and they carried those memories in the lines on their faces and the quiet way they watched the world. Their president was a man named Samuel Graves, though everyone called him Stone. He was 63 years old, built like a refrigerator, with a gray beard that reached his chest and eyes that seemed to see straight through whatever they looked at. Stone had founded the Iron Covenant in 1994. After coming home from a war that had taken pieces of him, he would never get back. The club had started as a way for veterans to find brotherhood again, to ride together, to heal together. Over the years, it had grown into something more. They raised money for children's hospitals. They escorted families of fallen soldiers. They showed up when communities needed them and disappeared when the cameras arrived. On this particular day, they were riding from Savannah to Atlanta, a charity run to raise awareness for homeless veterans. 47 bikes in formation, thundering down Highway 341 like a parade of chrome and leather and purpose. The August heat was brutal, and they had stopped at a small gas station in a town that barely qualified as a dot on the map. The kind of place where the only restaurant was a combination bait shop and barbecue joint, and the population sign had faded so badly you could not read the numbers anymore. Stone was filling his tank when he saw her. A small figure emerged from the tree line about a quarter-mile down the road. At first, he thought it might be a deer or some other animal moving through the brush. But then, the figure stepped onto the asphalt, and he could see it was a child, a little girl. She was wearing a faded yellow dress that looked like it had been washed 1,000 times, and her feet were bare. She was running, but it was the kind of running that came from exhaustion rather than energy. The desperate, stumbling run of someone who had already gone too far and had nothing left but willpower. Stone set down the gas pump and took a step forward. Around him, other members of the club had noticed too, big men with tattooed arms and weathered faces turning their attention toward this small figure approaching them from the distance. The girl was crying. Even from this far away, Stone could see the tears streaming down her dark skin, cutting trails through the dust that covered her face. Her feet were leaving small red marks on the pavement. She had been running for a long time, probably miles, over terrain that was never meant for bare feet. She ran straight toward them, not around them, not away from them, toward them, as if the sight of 47 bikers in leather and chains was somehow less frightening than whatever she had left behind. When she reached Stone, she collapsed at his feet. Her small body crumpled like a paper doll, and her chest heaved with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs. For a moment, no one moved. The gas station was silent, except for the hum of insects and the distant rumble of a truck on some far-off highway. Stone knelt down. His knees cracked with the effort, but he lowered himself to her level and placed one massive hand gently on her shoulder. The girl looked up at him with eyes that were too old for her face, eyes that had seen things no child should ever have to see. She opened her mouth to speak, but for a moment, nothing came out. Just more tears, more gasping breaths, more silent pleas that hung in the humid air between them. Then, finally, in a voice so small it was barely more than a whisper, she spoke the words that would change everything. "Please, my grandma is dying and nobody else will come." The gas station went still. Every man present stopped what he was doing. Hands that had been reaching for wallets or adjusting helmets or wiping sweat from foreheads all froze in place. They had all heard stories like this before. Stories of people forgotten by the system. Stories of the elderly and the poor left to suffer because they lived in places that were too remote, too invisible, too unimportant for anyone to notice. Stone looked at the girl for a long moment. He studied her face, her torn feet, her trembling hands. He saw the fear in her eyes, but he also saw something else. Courage. The kind of courage that sends a child running barefoot through miles of wilderness toward a group of strangers because there is simply no other choice. He turned to look at his brothers. Every one of them was watching him, waiting for the signal. These were men who had ridden into combat zones, men who had lost friends and family to wars both foreign and domestic, men who had learned long ago that sometimes the most important battles are the ones no one else is willing to fight. Stone nodded once, just once, but it was enough. The club mobilized instantly. Phones came out, maps were consulted, questions were asked with gentle urgency. "Where do you live, sweetheart? How far is it?" The girl pointed back the way she had come. "The old Jessup Road, past the dead oak tree. 3 miles, maybe 4. I ran the whole way." Stone did the math in his head. 3 or 4 miles through rough terrain. This little girl had run that distance on bare feet, in 100-degree heat, because she had no other options, because the adults in her life had failed her, because the systems that were supposed to protect people like her grandmother had simply looked the other way. He stood up and addressed his club with a voice that carried the weight of command. "Patch, you and Marcus take the girl in the support van. Keep her comfortable, keep her calm. Everyone else we ride. Now." The girl tried to stand, but her legs gave out beneath her. Marcus, a former army medic with hands the size dinner plates, lifted her as gently as if she were made of glass. He carried her to the van and set her on a padded bench inside, then began examining her feet with practiced efficiency. "You are going to be okay," he said softly. "We are going to help your grandma. I promise you that." The girl looked at him with those 2 old eyes and nodded slowly. For the first time since she had emerged from the woods, a tiny flicker of hope crossed her face. Stone mounted his motorcycle and kicked it to life. Around him, 46 other engines roared in response. The sound was deafening, primal, almost sacred. It was the sound of men who had found purpose in a world that often seemed devoid of meaning. They rode out of the gas station in tight formation, following the cracked asphalt of Highway 341 until it turned into a smaller county road, then an even smaller state route, then finally a dirt path that barely qualified as a road at all. The girl called out directions from the van, her small voice carried forward through radio handsets until everyone knew exactly where they were going. The Jessup Roadhouse was exactly what Stone had expected. A small wooden structure that had been built sometime in the 50s and had not been properly maintained since. The paint was peeling, the porch was sagging. A rusty pickup truck sat in the front yard, with 4 flat tires and weeds growing up through the engine compartment. There was no electricity, no running water from the looks of it, and no sign of any other human being within miles. Stone parked his bike and approached the front door with Marcus right behind him. The door was unlocked. It swung open with a creak that seemed to echo through the empty rooms beyond. They found the grandmother in a back bedroom. She was lying on a mattress on the floor, her frail body barely making a dent in the threadbare sheets. Her skin was grey. Her breathing was shallow and irregular. Her eyes were closed, but her lips moved slightly, as if she were whispering prayers to someone only she could see. Marcus knelt beside her and began a rapid assessment. He checked her pulse, her breathing, her pupil response. His face grew more concerned with each passing second. "She is in bad shape," he said quietly. "Dehydration, probably diabetic shock. She needs insulin, fluids, and medical attention immediately. If we do not get her to a hospital in the next hour, she is not going to make it." Stone pulled out his phone and dialed 911. The call connected after what felt like an eternity. "I need an ambulance at 4452 Jessup Road. We have an elderly woman in diabetic shock. She is unconscious and unresponsive. This is a life-threatening emergency." The dispatcher's voice was professional but distant. "Sir, that location is in a very remote area, The nearest available ambulance is currently responding to another call. Estimated arrival time is approximately 90 minutes. 90 minutes? Stone felt the words hit him like a physical blow. In 90 minutes, this woman would be dead. Her granddaughter would become an orphan, and another life would be added to the long list of people who had fallen through the cracks of a system that was supposed to protect them. He ended the call and looked at Marcus. We are not waiting 90 minutes. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. These are the stories that remind us why humanity still matters. Subscribe now so you never miss another one. Stone stepped outside and addressed his club. 46 men stood in the yard, waiting for orders, their faces set with determination. The ambulance is 90 minutes out. That is too long. We need to transport her ourselves, and we need to do it carefully. Marcus, what do you need? The medic thought for a moment. The support van has basic medical supplies. I can stabilize her for transport, but we need to get her to a hospital with a trauma unit. The nearest one with the right equipment is Grady Memorial in Atlanta. That is about 2 hours from here. 2 hours, it was too far, but there was nothing closer that could handle a case this severe. Then one of the younger members, a man named Eli, who had served as a helicopter pilot in the Marines, spoke up. What about the medical center in Valdosta? That is only about 45 minutes from here. They have a full trauma unit, and I know for a fact they have an endocrinology department. Stone considered this. Valdosta was closer, but it was in the opposite direction from their planned route. It would mean abandoning the charity ride, missing the event in Atlanta, disappointing hundreds of people who were expecting them. He looked back at the house. Through the window he could see Marcus working over the old woman's body, his hands moving with practiced urgency as he tried to stabilize her vital signs. There was no choice to make. There never had been. We ride to Valdosta. Full formation. Marcus, get her stable enough to transport. Everyone else, clear a path. We are going to get this woman to that hospital, if we have to push every car on that highway into a ditch. The club moved with military precision. Within 15 minutes, the grandmother had been carefully loaded into the support van, her fragile body secured on a makeshift stretcher that Marcus had assembled from materials in the vehicle. The little girl Iris sat beside her, holding her grandmother's hand with a grip that seemed too strong for such small fingers. Stone led the formation out of the dirt road and onto the highway. He rode at the front, his massive bike cutting through the air like a battering ram. Behind him, 46 motorcycles followed in perfect V formation, a wall of chrome and leather that stretched for nearly a quarter mile. They rode faster than was probably legal. They took up both lanes when they needed to. Cars pulled over to let them pass, their drivers staring in confusion at this sudden caravan of bikers, tearing through the Georgia countryside like a force of nature. 37 minutes after leaving the Jessup Roadhouse, they pulled into the emergency entrance of South Georgia Medical Center in Valdosta. Stone had called ahead during the ride, and a team of doctors and nurses were already waiting outside with a gurney and emergency equipment. They lifted the grandmother out of the van and rushed her inside. Iris tried to follow, but a nurse gently stopped her and explained that she needed to wait in the lobby while the doctors worked. The little girl looked up at Stone with those two old eyes. Is she going to be okay? Stone knelt down beside her, just as he had back at the gas station. His knees protested again, but he ignored them. The doctors here are very good, he said. They are going to take care of her, and we are going to stay right here with you until we know she is safe. Iris nodded slowly. Then, without warning, she threw her arms around his neck and buried her face in his leather vest. Her small body shook with sobs, but these were different from the tears of fear she had cried earlier. These were the tears of relief, the tears of a child who had carried an impossible weight on her shoulders and had finally found someone to help her share the load. Stone put his arms around her and held her gently. Around them, around. 46 bikers in leather and chains stood in awkward silence, massive men with weathered faces, trying very hard not to let their own eyes fill with tears. The waiting room of South Georgia Medical Center was not designed to accommodate 47 members of a motorcycle club, but somehow the Iron Covenant made it work. They filled every chair, lined every wall, and overflowed into the hallways. Hospital staff moved around them with a mixture of surprise and grudging respect. A few security guards approached initially, clearly concerned about this sudden invasion of leather-clad strangers, but Stone explained the situation calmly, and the guards backed off. Iris sat in the center of the group, surrounded by men who looked like they could bench-press pickup trucks, but who were currently taking turns bringing her cups of juice from the vending machine and asking if she was hungry or thirsty, or if she needed another blanket. One of the club members, A quiet man named Thomas, who everyone called Ghost, because of the way he seemed to appear and disappear without making a sound, sat down next to Iris and pulled out a deck of cards. "You know how to play Go Fish?" he asked. Iris shook her head. "Well, that is okay. I will teach you. It is pretty easy, and it will help pass the time." He dealt out the cards with practiced hands, his tattooed fingers moving with surprising grace. Iris watched carefully, her brow furrowed in concentration, and within a few minutes she was fully engaged in the game, asking for 3s and 7s with the same intensity she had shown while running down that dusty road. 3 hours passed. The sun set beyond the hospital windows, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that no one inside noticed. Coffee was consumed by the gallon. Sandwiches were ordered from a nearby deli and distributed among the group. Through it all, Iris stayed close to the core group of bikers who had found her, her small presence somehow becoming the center of their universe. Finally, a doctor emerged from the treatment area. He was a young man, maybe 35, with tired eyes and a stethoscope draped around his neck. He looked around the waiting room with visible confusion at the sea of leather and beards that greeted him. "I am looking for the family of Eleanor Washington." Iris jumped to her feet. "That is my grandma. Is she okay? Is she going to be okay?" The doctor knelt down to her level, just as Stone had done hours earlier. "Your grandma is going to be just fine, sweetheart. She was very sick, but we were able to stabilize her. She is resting now, and she is going to need to stay in the hospital for a few days so we can make sure she recovers completely, but she is going to be okay." The tension in the room evaporated like morning fog. Grown men who had faced enemy fire without flinching suddenly found themselves needing to wipe their eyes. Ghost put down his cards and let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. Iris turned to look at Stone. Her eyes were shining, not with fear this time, but with something that looked very much like gratitude. "You saved her," she said simply. "You all saved her." Stone shook his head. "No, little one, you saved her. You ran for miles on bare feet. You found us. You refused to give up when anyone else would have. We just gave you a ride." The doctor led Iris back to see her grandmother. The rest of the club began to settle in for what was clearly going to be a long night. No one talked about leaving. No one mentioned the charity ride they had missed, or the disappointed crowds waiting in Atlanta. Some things were simply more important. Over the next several hours, Stone began to piece together the full story of what had happened to Iris and her grandmother. Hospital social workers had been contacted. Child Protective Services had been notified. Slowly the truth emerged, and it was grimmer than even Stone had imagined. Eleanor Washington was 78 years old. She had raised Iris since the girl was 2, after her daughter, Iris's mother, had passed away from complications during childbirth. For 16 years, Eleanor had been both mother and grandmother to this little girl, providing for her on nothing but a meager social security check and the occasional odd job. 6 months ago, a man named Curtis had entered their lives. He claimed to be a distant cousin, though no one could ever verify this claim. He had shown up at their door with a smile and a sob story about hard times and no place to go. Eleanor, because she was the kind of woman who could not turn away anyone in need, had let him stay. At first, Curtis had been helpful. He fixed things around the house. He drove them to appointments. He even contributed a little money to the household expenses. But slowly, over the weeks and months, his true nature began to emerge. He had started controlling the money, then the food, then the electricity. He had convinced Eleanor to give him access to her bank account, and then he had drained it completely. When she confronted him, he had laughed and told her there was nothing she could do about it. He was family, after all. Who would believe her? 3 days ago, Curtis had taken the car, the last of the money, and disappeared without a word. He had left Eleanor without food, without medicine, and without any way to contact the outside world. The phone had been cut off months before. The nearest neighbor was miles away through rough terrain. And Eleanor's diabetes, which had been carefully managed with insulin for years, had suddenly become a death sentence. Iris had done everything she could. She had rationed the remaining food. She had tried to keep her grandmother comfortable. But when Eleanor slipped into unconsciousness, Iris knew that she was out of options. She had heard the motorcycles on the highway and had made a desperate decision to run toward them, barefoot, through miles of woods and fields, because it was the only chance she had left. Stone listened to this story with a face like carved stone, his expression revealing nothing of the fury building inside him. When the social worker finished speaking, he asked only one question: "Where is Curtis now?" The social worker shrugged. "We do not know. He has not been seen since he left. The police have been notified, but Without any evidence of a specific crime, there is not much they can do. Stone nodded slowly. He did not say anything else, but later that night he made several phone calls from the hospital parking lot, calls to people who owed him favors, calls to organizations that specialized in tracking down people who did not want to be found, calls that set things in motion that would not become apparent for several weeks. For now, though, his focus remained on Iris and her grandmother. The Iron Covenant stayed in Valdosta for 3 days. They rented out an entire floor of a nearby motel and took turns keeping watch at the hospital. They brought flowers to Eleanor's room and toys for Iris. They made phone calls to ensure that the charity event in Atlanta knew what had happened and why they had not arrived. The organizers, when they heard the story, announced that they would reschedule the event and use the delay to generate even more donations for homeless veterans. On the second day, Eleanor woke up fully. She was weak and confused at first, but when she saw her granddaughter's face, tears of joy streamed down her weathered cheeks. "My baby," she whispered. "My brave, beautiful baby girl. You came for me." Iris crawled into the hospital bed beside her grandmother, careful not to disturb the tubes and wires connected to her frail body. "I found help, Grandma. I found people who cared." Stone stood in the doorway watching this reunion with a lump in his throat that no amount of tough guy posturing could dislodge. He had seen a lot of things in his life, good and bad. He had buried friends and enemies alike, but there was something about this moment, this simple act of love between a grandmother and her grandchild, that cut straight through all of his carefully constructed walls. Eleanor looked up and saw him standing there. Her eyes narrowed slightly, taking in the leather vest, the gray beard, the imposing physical presence. For a moment, Stone wondered if she would be afraid, if she would ask him to leave. Instead, she extended one thin hand toward him. "Come here," she said softly. Stone approached the bed slowly, almost reverently. He took her hand in both of his, feeling how fragile her fingers were, like the bones of a bird. "Thank you," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for saving my grandchild, for saving both of us." Stone shook his head. "Your granddaughter saved you, Mom. She is the bravest person I have ever met. All we did was follow where she led." Eleanor smiled weakly. "Well then, thank you for following. Thank you for listening. Thank you for not looking away when so many others would have." That night, Stone called a meeting of the club's senior members. They gathered in the motel parking lot under a sky full of stars, their voices low as they discussed what came next. "The grandmother is going to need extended care," Marcus reported. "Months of recovery, probably. Physical therapy, dietary management, regular medical check-ins. There is no way she can go back to that house in her current condition, even if they wanted to." "What about the girl?" asked Thomas, his quiet voice barely above a whisper. "CPS is looking at options. Foster care, most likely, unless a family member can be found." Stone felt his jaw tighten. Foster care. He had seen what that system could do to children, how it could break them in ways that never fully healed. Iris had already been through more than any child should ever have to endure. The thought of her being shuffled from house to house, separated from the only family she had ever known, filled him with a cold anger that had nothing to do with Curtis and everything to do with a world that seemed designed to fail the people who needed it most. "That is not happening," he said flatly. He said, "We are not letting that happen." The other men nodded in agreement. They did not need to discuss the details yet. They just needed to know that they were all on the same page. The next morning, Stone made a call to an old friend named Margaret Chen. Margaret was a lawyer who specialized in family law and had done pro bono work for the club on several occasions. She was smart, tenacious, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting children's rights. "I need you to come to Valdosta," Stone said. "There is a little girl here who needs someone in her corner." Margaret arrived that afternoon. She spent hours interviewing Iris, Eleanor, the social workers, and the hospital staff. She reviewed every document, every medical record, every piece of evidence that could help build a case for keeping Iris with her grandmother. By the end of the week, Margaret had assembled a plan. She would petition the court for emergency guardianship, with Eleanor as the legal guardian, and the Iron Covenant providing financial and logistical support until the grandmother was well enough to care for Iris independently. She would also file criminal charges against Curtis for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and reckless endangerment. "It is going to take time," Margaret warned. "These cases always do, but I have seen worse situations turn out well. The key is consistency. Being there, showing the court that this child has a stable support system." Stone nodded. "She has that. She has us. If you believe in the power of community, If you believe that ordinary people can make an extraordinary difference, then leave a comment right now saying, "Real heroes show up." We want to hear from you, and your comment helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. The Iron Covenant kept their word. Over the following months, they became a constant presence in the lives of Iris and Eleanor. They helped move the grandmother and granddaughter out of the dilapidated Jessup Roadhouse and into a small but comfortable apartment in Valdosta. They paid for medical treatments and physical therapy. They enrolled Iris in a good school and made sure she had everything she needed to succeed. Stone visited every Sunday without fail. He would bring groceries and flowers and small gifts for Iris, things like books and art supplies that she probably would never have asked for but clearly loved. He would sit with Eleanor for hours, listening to her stories about growing up in rural Georgia, about her late husband, about all the struggles and joys of raising a child in a world that often seemed stacked against them. Iris began to flourish. The trauma of those terrible days began to fade, replaced by new experiences and new relationships that slowly rewired her young brain toward hope instead of fear. She made friends at school. She discovered a talent for painting that surprised everyone, including herself. She started calling Stone Uncle Stone, a title he accepted with a gruff nod that fooled absolutely no one. 8 months after that fateful day at the gas station, Margaret Chen called Stone with news. They found Curtis. He was in Jacksonville running a similar scheme on another elderly woman. This time someone reported him before things got too bad. He is in custody now, and the prosecutor is building a case that includes what he did to Eleanor. Stone felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had not even realized he was carrying. What happens next? Trial, probably. Could take a year or more, but the evidence is strong. Between the financial records and the testimony from both victims, he is looking at significant prison time. Eleanor and Iris will need to testify, but I will be with them every step of the way. So will we, Stone said firmly. The trial took place the following spring. Curtis sat in the defendant's chair looking smaller and more pathetic than Stone had imagined. He tried to play the victim, claiming that he had been misunderstood, that he had only been trying to help. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury saw right through his lies. When Iris took the stand, the entire courtroom fell silent. This small girl, now 11 years old, looked directly at the man who had almost killed her grandmother and spoke with a clarity and courage that left everyone in attendance shaken. "You left us to die," she said quietly. "You stole everything we had and you left us alone. And you did not care what happened to us. My grandma almost died because of you. I had to run for miles with no shoes because there was no other way to get help. And you think you can just say sorry and make that okay?" She paused, her eyes never leaving Curtis's face. "I forgive you," she continued. "Not because you deserve it, but because I do not want to carry anger in my heart forever. But I also want you to know that you failed. You tried to destroy our family, and you failed, because there are good people in this world. People who show up when others look away, people who care about strangers. And those people saved us." Curtis was convicted on all counts. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, with no possibility of early release. When the verdict was read, Eleanor wept quietly in her seat, while Iris held her hand. Stone sat in the back of the courtroom with a dozen members of the Iron Covenant, their leather vests and stern expressions, providing a silent reminder that justice sometimes needs witnesses. After the trial, life began to find a new rhythm. Eleanor's health continued to improve, and within a year, she was well enough to live independently with only occasional assistance. The apartment in Valdosta became a real home, filled with artwork that Iris had created and photographs of the extended family she had gained. The Iron Covenant continued their charity work, their rides, their mission to serve veterans and protect the vulnerable. But they had gained something new as well, a sense of purpose that went beyond their original mandate. A reminder that the world was full of people like Iris, people who were fighting battles no one else could see, people who just needed someone to show up at the right moment. Stone became a regular figure in Valdosta's community. He spoke at schools about making a difference. He mentored young men who were struggling to find their place in the world. He raised funds for organizations that helped the elderly and the disabled. And every Sunday, without fail, he visited Iris and Eleanor and shared a meal with the family he had never expected to find. On the 1-year anniversary of that day at the gas station, the club organized a special celebration. They rented out a community center and invited everyone who had been part of the story. Social workers, doctors, nurses, lawyers, neighbors, and friends. They decorated the walls with Iris's paintings and filled the tables with food. At the center of the room stood a simple display, a pair of worn children's shoes, bronze-plated and mounted on a wooden base. Beneath them, a small plaque read, "Sometimes the smallest feet make the biggest footprints," in honor of Iris Washington, who reminded us all what courage really looks like. Iris stood before the display with tears streaming down her face. She looked around the room at all the people who had become part of her story, all the strangers who had refused to remain strangers, and for the first time since that terrible day, she understood that she was not alone, that she never had been, that the world, for all its cruelty and indifference, was also full of people who would show up when it mattered most. Stone approached her and placed one massive hand on her shoulder. "You did this," he said quietly. "You changed all of us. You showed us what it means to fight for the people we love. Never forget that." Iris looked up at him with eyes that were no longer too old for her face. They were bright, hopeful, full of the kind of light that comes from knowing you are loved. "I won't forget," she promised, "and I will spend my whole life showing up for other people, the way you showed up for me." The celebration continued late into the night. Stories were shared, laughter echoed off the walls, connections were made that would last for years, and somewhere in the midst of it all, a simple truth emerged that everyone present could feel but no one needed to say. Technology can do many things. It can cure diseases and explore the stars and connect people across vast distances, but it cannot replace the simple human act of showing up, of being present, of looking at someone in need and saying, without hesitation, "I am here, and I am not going anywhere." That was what the Iron Covenant had done. That was what Iris had taught them, and that was the lesson that would ripple outward from this small gathering in a Valdosta community center to touch lives that none of them would ever know about. Because stories like this do not really end. They multiply, they inspire. They create chains of compassion that stretch across time and space in ways that cannot be measured or predicted. And somewhere out there, right now, someone else is standing at a crossroads. Someone else is deciding whether to look away or to step forward. Someone else is about to discover that the simplest acts of courage can change everything. The question is, what will you do? 2 years passed. The seasons changed and changed again. The pine forests of Georgia cycled through their eternal rhythms of growth and dormancy, and the ripples of that single act of courage continued to spread in ways that no one could have predicted. Iris turned 12, then 13. She grew taller and stronger, her body catching up to the spirit that had always been too large for her small frame. She excelled in school, particularly in art and English, and her teachers began to talk about college scholarships and bright futures, but she never forgot where she came from, or the lessons she had learned on that dusty road. Every summer she volunteered at local organizations that helped the elderly and the isolated. She started a program at her school called Nobody Gets Left Behind, which paired students with homebound seniors in the community. They would visit once a week, help with chores, run errands, and most importantly, simply spend time with people who might otherwise go days without seeing another human face. The program started small, just Iris and a few friends, but it grew quickly. Within a year, over 50 students were participating. Within 2 years, schools in neighboring counties had started their own versions. Local news stations picked up the story, and soon Iris found herself being interviewed about her work. "Why did you start this program?" a reporter asked during one of these interviews. Iris thought for a moment before answering. "When I was 10, my grandmother almost died because there was no one to help us. We were forgotten, and I remember how that felt. I remember thinking that nobody cared, that we were invisible, but then these strangers showed up and they refused to let us be invisible. They saved our lives, and I realized that anyone can do that. Anyone can show up for someone else. You just have to choose to see the people that everyone else ignores." The interview went viral. Millions of people watched this 13-year-old girl speak about compassion and community with a wisdom that seemed to belong to someone much older. Messages poured in from around the country, from people who had been inspired by her story, from organizations that wanted to partner with her, from individuals who simply wanted to thank her for reminding them what mattered. Stone watched all of this from a distance, his heart swelling with a pride he had never expected to feel. He had spent most of his life believing that he was not the kind of person who could change the world. He was just an old biker with too many memories and not enough hope. But this little girl had shown him something different. She had shown him that change does not require grand gestures or massive resources. It just requires showing up. The Iron Covenant continued to evolve as well. Inspired by their experience with Iris and Eleanor, they expanded their mission to include outreach to isolated elderly individuals. They partnered with local organizations to identify people who were at risk of falling through the cracks and organized regular check-in visits. They raised funds to help with medical expenses and home repairs. They became, in effect, a safety net for those who had no other safety net. Other motorcycle clubs around the country took notice. Word spread through the vast network of riders who shared a common ethos of brotherhood and service. Soon, similar programs were being established in Texas, California, Florida, and beyond. The model that had emerged from that chance encounter at a Georgia gas station was being replicated in communities across the nation. Marcus, the former Army medic who had stabilized Eleanor on that critical day, decided to go back to school. He enrolled in a nursing program with the goal of becoming a nurse practitioner specializing in geriatric care. It was a long and difficult journey for a man in his 50s, but every time he felt like giving up, he thought about Iris running barefoot down that dusty road, and he found the strength to continue. Thomas, the quiet man everyone called Ghost, started working with at-risk youth in his hometown of Birmingham. He used his military experience and his gentle demeanor to reach kids who had given up on adults, kids who reminded him of Iris in their desperate courage and their refusal to surrender. And Eleanor, now 80 years old, became a beloved figure in Valdosta's community. She spoke at churches and community centers about resilience and faith. She mentored young mothers who were struggling to raise children on their own. She became the grandmother that many people in her neighborhood had never had. Her health remained stable, a testament to the care she had received and the support system that surrounded her. But she knew that her time was limited, as everyone's time is limited, and she spent her remaining years making sure that every day counted for something. On the morning of Iris's 15th birthday, Stone arrived at their apartment with a large wrapped package. He had driven through the night from Savannah, determined to be there for this milestone. Iris opened the package to find a brand new set of professional art supplies, brushes and paints and canvases of a quality she had never owned before. There was also a letter, handwritten in Stone's careful script. "Dear Iris," it read, "15 years ago I thought I knew what courage looked like. I had seen it on battlefields and in hospital rooms and in 1,000 small moments of human dignity, but I was wrong. I did not really understand courage until I saw a barefoot little girl running down a dirt road toward a group of strangers, refusing to give up on someone she loved. You taught me that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act anyway. It is the choice to show up when showing up is the hardest thing in the world. You have a gift, Iris, not just for art. Although your talent is remarkable, your real gift is the ability to see people, to really see them, to look past the surface and recognize the humanity underneath. That is the rarest gift of all, and I hope you never lose it. Happy birthday. With love, Uncle Stone." Iris read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she looked up at the massive old biker, standing awkwardly in her living room, and she ran to him and threw her arms around him, just as she had done 5 years earlier in that hospital waiting room. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Stone held her gently, blinking back his own tears. "Thank you for letting us be part of your story, for showing us that we could still make a difference, that we still mattered." They stood there for a long moment, grandmother and granddaughter and honorary uncle, a family that had been forged not by blood, but by something stronger, by choice, by commitment, by the simple refusal to look away when someone needed help. Outside the window, the Georgia sun was rising over a world that was full of both darkness and light. Somewhere out there, other children were running toward uncertain futures. Other elderly people were sitting alone in silent houses. Other communities were waiting for someone to show up and remind them that they mattered. And in living rooms and community centers and motorcycle clubhouses across the country, people were answering that call, not because it was easy, not because they expected anything in return, but because that is what humans do when they are at their best. They show up, they care, they refuse to let the darkness win. The story of Iris and Eleanor and the Iron Covenant had become part of a larger tapestry, a single thread in a vast web of compassion that stretched across time and space. It was a story that would be told and retold, adapted and expanded, passed down through generations as a reminder of what is possible when people choose to see each other. And in the end, that was the real lesson. Not that technology is insufficient, although it often is. Not that institutions fail, although they frequently do. The real lesson was simpler and more profound. We are the help we have been waiting for. We are the ones who show up. We are the barefoot children running towards strangers, hoping against hope that someone will listen. And we are the strangers who listen. The choice is always there. Every day, in 1,000 small moments, we decide whether to look away or to step forward, whether to pretend we did not see or to acknowledge what is right in front of us, whether to wait for someone else to solve the problem or to become part of the solution ourselves. Iris made that choice at 10 years old, with bleeding feet and a desperate heart. The Iron Covenant made that choice at a gas station, when they could have just as easily filled their tanks and kept riding. Eleanor made that choice every day of her life, opening her home and her heart to anyone who needed them. And now the choice passes to you. What will you do with it? 5 years later, Iris stood at a podium in front of 300 people. She was 20 years old now, a junior at Savannah College of Art and Design, where she was pursuing a degree in fine arts with a minor in community development. The event was the annual gathering of the National Coalition for Elder Care, and she had been invited to deliver the keynote address. She looked out at the audience, a sea of faces representing social workers, healthcare professionals, non-profit leaders, and caregivers from across the country. She saw Stone sitting in the front row, his grey beard now almost entirely white, his massive frame slightly stooped with age, but his eyes as sharp as ever. Beside him sat Marcus, now a practicing nurse practitioner at a clinic that specialized in serving low-income elderly patients, and behind them, a dozen members of the Iron Covenant in their leather vests, looking slightly out of place in this formal setting, but absolutely refusing to miss this moment. Iris took a deep breath and began to speak. 10 years ago, I was a barefoot little girl running down a dirt road in rural Georgia. My grandmother was dying. Our electricity had been cut off. Our car had been stolen. There was no one to call and nowhere to go. I had no idea what I was running toward. I just knew that I could not stop. She paused, letting the words settle over the audience. I was lucky, incredibly, impossibly lucky, because when I emerged from those woods, I found a group of strangers who were willing to drop everything and help. They did not know me. They had no reason to care about what happened to me or my grandmother, but they showed up anyway, and that act of showing up saved our lives. She looked at Stone, who nodded slightly, his eyes glistening. Since then, I have thought a lot about what made that moment possible. What was it about those particular people that allowed them to respond with such immediate compassion? And more importantly, how can we create a world where that kind of response is the norm rather than the exception? She clicked a button, and an image appeared on the screen behind her. It was a map of the United States, covered with small dots representing communities where elder isolation programs now operated. This is what has happened in the 10 years since that day at the gas station. Thousands of volunteers across 47 states have signed up to check on isolated elderly individuals in their communities. Hundreds of organizations have adopted protocols for identifying and responding to elder neglect. Dozens of laws have been passed to strengthen protections for vulnerable adults, and countless lives have been saved because someone, somewhere, decided to pay attention. She clicked again, and the map was replaced by a photograph. It showed a young girl and an old woman sitting together on a porch swing, their faces turned toward each other, their hands intertwined. But I want to be honest with you, all of this progress, all of these programs and protocols and policies, they are not enough. They can never be enough. Because the problem we are fighting is not really about systems or institutions, it is about disconnection. It is about a world that moves so fast and asks so much of us that we often forget to look up and see the people right in front of us. She stepped out from behind the podium and walked to the edge of the stage. My grandmother passed away 2 years ago. She was 83 years old. She died peacefully, in her own home, surrounded by people who loved her, and in the last days of her life she told me something that I will never forget. Iris's voice caught slightly, but she pressed on. She said, "Baby, the world is going to tell you that you cannot make a difference. It is going to show you all the problems that are too big to solve, all the pain that is too deep to heal, and some of that is true. We cannot fix everything, we cannot save everyone, but we can save someone. We can show up for one person, and if enough of us do that, if enough of us decide that one person is worth the effort, then the world starts to change, not all at once, not overnight, but slowly, surely, inexorably. The world changes because we change it." She looked out at the audience, making eye contact with as many people as possible. That is why we are here today, not to solve the problem of elder isolation. That problem is too big for any one conference or any one organization. We are here to commit to showing up, to being present, to looking at the people in our communities who might be invisible to everyone else and saying, "I see you, I care about you, you matter." She walked back to the podium and gripped its edges. There is a little girl out there right now who is running toward help. Maybe her feet are bare, maybe she has been running for hours, maybe she has no idea if anyone will listen when she arrives, but she is running anyway, because she has no other choice. The question is, will you be there when she arrives? Will you show up? The audience sat in silence for a long moment. Then slowly the applause began. It started in the front row with Stone and Marcus and the members of the Iron Covenant rising to their feet. It spread backward through the hall, growing in volume and intensity until it filled every corner of the room. Iris stood at the podium, tears streaming down her face, feeling the weight of every moment that had led to this point. The terror of that day 10 years ago, the pain of watching her grandmother suffer, the joy of discovering that help existed, that strangers could become family, that the world was not as cold and indifferent as it sometimes seemed. And somewhere in the back of the hall, invisible to everyone, the spirit of Eleanor Washington smiled down on her granddaughter with a pride that transcended the boundaries between worlds. Because this is what happens when we show up. This is what happens when we refuse to look away. This is what happens when we remember that every person, no matter how small or how forgotten, has the capacity to change everything. If you watched until now, it means this story touched something in your heart. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end," so I can get to know you and know who really values the stories on this channel. Your comment means more than you know. And if this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Every share helps these messages of hope reach more people who might be feeling invisible. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story of courage, compassion, and the extraordinary power of ordinary people. Because the next story might be about someone just like you. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows of the Savannah College of Art and Design's senior exhibition hall. Canvases lined the walls, each one representing years of study, struggle, and artistic evolution. But one painting drew a crowd larger than all the others combined. It was massive, nearly 8 feet tall and 12 feet wide. The composition showed a small figure, clearly a child, standing at the edge of a dirt road. Her feet were bare, her dress was faded yellow, and her hand was raised toward a distant horizon. In the background, barely visible through a haze of heat and dust, the silhouettes of motorcycles emerged like the approaching army. But what made the painting truly remarkable was the sky. Instead of the harsh Georgia blue that logic would dictate, the artist had chosen to fill the upper third of the canvas with swirling colors that seemed to shift and change depending on where you stood. Blues and purples and golds that suggested both storm clouds and sunrise, both ending and beginning, both fear and hope. At the bottom of the painting, a small brass plaque read, "The Day They Showed Up," by Iris Washington. Iris stood near the painting, greeting visitors and answering questions about her process and inspiration. She was 22 now, about to graduate with honors, already fielding offers from galleries and museums that wanted to represent her work. But she was not thinking about any of that today. She was thinking about the people she wished could be here. Eleanor, who had passed away peacefully 3 years earlier, her last words a prayer of gratitude for the family she had never expected to find. Stone, who had died 6 months ago from a heart attack while out on a charity ride. He had been doing what he loved, surrounded by his brothers, riding toward the next opportunity to make a difference. The club had scattered his ashes along the coastal highway he had loved so much, and in a way both of them were present. Iris could feel them in the warm light that filled the gallery. She could hear them in the murmured appreciations of the visitors who stopped to study her painting. She could sense their pride in every compliment and every thoughtful question. Marcus approached her with a cup of coffee and a gentle smile. He had taken over as president of the Iron Covenant after Stone's passing, a responsibility he had never sought, but had accepted without hesitation. The club was smaller now, but its mission remained unchanged. Every weekend, members spread out across Georgia and beyond, checking on isolated elderly, mentoring at-risk youth, showing up wherever they were needed. "She would have been so proud of you," Marcus said, nodding toward the painting. "Both of them would," Iris agreed. "I still feel like they're here sometimes, like they're watching over everything." "Maybe they are. Stone always said that the people we love never really leave us. They just change form, become part of the wind and the road and all the places we've been together." Iris smiled at the memory. Stone had been surprisingly philosophical for a man who looked like he could bench press a motorcycle. It was one of the many contradictions that had made him so extraordinary. A young woman approached them hesitantly. She was about 18 with dark skin and careful eyes, that seemed to take in everything at once. She was holding a program from the exhibition, and she kept glancing between the painting and Iris as if she could not quite believe what she was seeing. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Are you Iris Washington, the one from the story?" Iris nodded. "That's me." The young woman's eyes filled with tears. "I just wanted to thank you. I saw your video online a few years ago, the one where you talked about your grandmother and the bikers and everything, and it changed my life." "How so?" "My great-aunt lives alone in a rural area in Alabama. Nobody in my family really checked on her. We all assumed someone else was doing it. But after I saw your story, I started calling her every day, just to talk, just to make sure she was okay, and last year I was on the phone with her when she had a stroke. I was able to call for help immediately. The doctor said that if I hadn't been on the line with her, if there had been any delay at all, she probably wouldn't have made it." Iris felt her own eyes beginning to burn. "She's okay now. She's doing great. She moved in with us, actually. My mom converted the garage into an apartment for her. She's teaching me how to make her famous lemon cake, and she's driving everyone crazy with her opinions about politics." The young woman laughed through her tears. "But we love having her there. We almost lost her, and now we have her every day. And it's because of you. Because you told your story and reminded people that showing up matters." Iris embraced the young woman, this stranger who had become part of the larger story that had started so many years ago on a dusty Georgia road. "It wasn't just me," Iris said when they separated. "It was everyone who showed up, everyone who made a choice to pay attention. You saved your great-aunt. You did that. All I did was remind you that it was possible." The young woman wiped her eyes and smiled. "Well, thank you for the reminder, and thank you for this painting. It's beautiful. It's like looking at hope made visible." She walked away, clutching her program, and Iris watched her go with a full heart. That evening, after the gallery had closed and the crowds had dispersed, Iris stayed behind to say goodbye to her painting. It would be transported to a museum in Atlanta the next day, where it would hang in a permanent collection dedicated to works that explored themes of community and resilience. She stood before it in the quiet darkness, letting her eyes trace the familiar lines and colors that represented the most significant moment of her life. "I did it, Grandma," she whispered to the empty room. "I told our story. I made it beautiful. I made it matter." And in the silence that followed, she could almost hear her grandmother's voice, warm and gentle, carried on the air conditioning's faint hum. "You always mattered, baby. You just had to believe it." Iris smiled and touched the painting one last time. Then she turned and walked out into the night, toward whatever came next, carrying with her everything she had learned and everyone she had loved. The world was still full of problems. People were still forgotten. Systems still failed. But the world was also full of people who showed up, people who made choices every day to see the invisible, to lift the fallen, to run toward those who needed help. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you got to be one of those people. Sometimes you got to be the barefoot girl on the road, and sometimes you got to be the stranger who stopped. 20 years after the Iron Covenant found Iris Washington on that dusty Georgia road, a new generation of riders gathered in a parking lot in Valdosta for their annual memorial ride. They wore leather vests with patches that had been earned through decades of service. Many of them had never met Stone or Marcus or the original members who had transformed a chance encounter into a movement. But they knew the story. Everyone knew the story. At the head of the formation sat a woman on a custom-painted motorcycle. She was 30 years old now, her hair cropped short, her arms covered in sleeves of tattoos that told the story of her life. On her back, the name Washington was stitched in white thread above the club's logo. Iris kicked her bike to life and felt the familiar rumble between her legs. The engine's growl was like a heartbeat, steady and strong, connecting her to everyone who had ridden before her and everyone who would ride after. She thought about her grandmother, who had taught her that family was a choice you made every day. She thought about Stone, who had shown her that strength without compassion was worthless. She thought about all the people she had helped over the years, all the hands she had held, all the burdens she had shared, and she thought about the little girl she had been, barefoot and terrified, running toward an uncertain future, with nothing but faith and desperation. That girl was still inside her. She always would be. That girl was the engine that drove everything else, the flame that could not be extinguished, the voice that said, "Keep going, don't stop. Someone out there needs you." Iris raised her hand, and 46 other riders revved their engines in response. The sound was deafening, primal, beautiful. It was the sound of purpose, the sound of belonging, the sound of a community that had been forged through struggle and sustained through commitment. She dropped her hand, and the formation began to move, out of the parking lot onto the highway, toward whatever waited beyond the next bend in the road. Somewhere ahead, someone was in trouble. Someone was alone, someone was running out of hope, and the Iron Covenant was riding to meet them, because that is what they did. That is what they would always do, because no amount of technology could replace the simple human act of showing up, because no algorithm could calculate the value of being seen, because no machine could replicate the warmth of a hand held in the darkness. The motorcycles thundered down the Georgia highway, chrome flashing in the afternoon sun, a testament to the enduring power of human connection. And somewhere, in a small house on the edge of town, a child heard the distant rumble and looked up with hope. Help was coming. It always was. You just had to believe.